Now, I want to go to the news out of Israel on the weekend. It was just terrible. 6 hostages murdered by Hamas just when there were hopes that they might be freed. Now, I watched more videotape of the October 7 atrocities today. I was sent some new material. It was gut-wrenching. It makes you despair for humanity. But to think that these 6 people could have been taken amid that atrocity and then held by Hamas in the tunnels for almost 11 months and then slaughtered in cold blood, it is just pure evil. It is unimaginable evil. One of the murdered hostages was an American citizen, Hersh Goldberg-Polin. And look at how CNN reported his slaughter. Hersh has died, his family says. Has died. Of what? Food poisoning? A fever? A snake bite? This is typical of the sanitisation of Hamas atrocities. These hostages were slaughtered in acts of Jew-hating Islamist terrorism. And media needs to be clear about that. Activists try to pretend this stuff from Hamas is some form of political resistance. It sickens me. At least the Adelaide Advertiser gave this story the prominence it deserved today, while for much of the media it was merely a footnote. Remember, there are still 100 hostages either held alive or whose bodies are still held by Hamas. In Israel, many people understandably would do anything, perhaps surrender anything to get them back. Here's the latest report on the 6 murdered hostages from Sky News UK.
4 of the dead were buried on Sunday afternoon. Their bodies had been found in Gaza less than 24 hours beforehand. Hundreds walked in near silence and disbelief at the funeral of Almog Sarusi. He was 27 years old. These were funerals that their families and all Israelis prayed would never happen. These 6 young men and women were alive until a few days ago. It had been expected that they would have been some of the first released in a hostage deal. Their deaths in a tunnel in southern Gaza have sent shockwaves around Israel. Tonight in Jerusalem, crowds gathered outside the Parliament building and the Prime Minister's office, the centres of power that they believe have failed them. In central Tel Aviv, hundreds of thousands took to the streets at the main protest outside the Defence Ministry.
Let's bring in Liberal Senator Dave Sharma, who was Australia's ambassador to Israel for 4 years. Good to talk to you again, Dave. I'll talk about some of the political and diplomatic consequences in a moment. But first up, just your reaction to these 6 murders. Why would Hamas have done this? What's triggered this?
Well, look, it's obviously terribly sad and a terrible tragedy. 5 of these Israelis have been taken from that Nova music festival in the town of Re'im. One of them was taken from Kibbutz Be'eri. I was in both of those locations just a few months ago. And, these people have been held in terrible conditions for, I think, 331 days now. And for them to be killed by Hamas within potentially hours of their rescue is just horrific beyond all belief, and I can understand their families are devastated. I presume, all the evidence suggests that Hamas murdered these hostages when it became clear that it was not going to be able to use them as leverage or to trade them in some way, because there was a risk that the IDF would recapture them alive. So rather than allow that to happen, they, put bullets into their bodies and put an end to their life, which just shows you the terrible disregard they have for any sort of human life.
Yeah, they are indeed a death cult, as Tony Abbott describes them. I want to get to the politics of it. We've seen the incredible demonstrations in Tel Aviv against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Explain the politics of this to us, because a lot of people from afar will just be saying that they want him to stop the war, etc. But it's more complex than that. There are people who are protesting. They can freely protest, of course, against their government in Israel, unlike anyone trying to protest against Hamas in Gaza. But the point is here that a lot of people believe he should just give up anything he can to get the hostages back, right?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of families of hostages and, look, no criticism of them. If I was in their position, I'm sure I'd be behaving the same way.
Indeed.
Who think that a ceasefire deal must be made on any terms and under any conditions. Now, Netanyahu, I think with Israel's security interests in mind, has been insisting that the IDF retain control of a few key pieces of territory in Gaza. the border crossing with Egypt and a corridor down the middle called the Netzarim corridor to make sure that Hamas is not able to regroup and perpetuate another October the 7th down the track. That's, putting aside what Hamas's view is, and there's good reasons to doubt whether they've got any desire to reach a ceasefire agreement whatsoever. This is the sort of debate that's happening within Israel, and I think the hostage families and those protesters that you saw out in full force on Sunday are insisting that Netanyahu needs to weaken the security elements of his approach to this deal and prioritise the release of the hostages. As I said, understandable from where they sit, but from where he sits as Prime Minister, he's got to balance, frankly, some almost irreconcilable objectives there.
Yeah, indeed. Thanks so much, Dave. I appreciate it. Dave Sharma there with the latest analysis of what's been transpiring in the Middle East.